Waiting for it to start. Okay, we should be live now. Great. So, hi, my name is Juno, and you're
My name is Giovanni Borunda.
awesome. And today we are talking about your comic books. So, maybe we can just get started by an open question about you talking about your comic books, yourself, just something basic.
Awesome. Well, I've been a lifelong comic fan ever since the early '90s when I first picked up the comic books when I was 9 years old. So it's been something I've always loved. I always loved drawing since I could remember. So when I discovered comic books, it was just one of those things where it was just like I loved telling stories and I loved drawing. So it was just one of those things where I just fell in love with it immediately. And throughout my high school years, I always wanted to be a writer and to draw. But eventually, I kind of realized that I was a lot better at writing than I was drawing. Because I think everybody my age, like people my age who got into comics in the early '90s, all grew up with like the Image Comics guys with Jim Lee and Mark Silvestri and all these guys, and there was no way I was going to draw like that. So I kind of just shifted over to writing, and in the last 5 years, I've kind of really taken my career more seriously and kind of just started to put myself out there and become published finally after so many years of trying and a lot of false starts and stuff like that. But I never gave up, and I am here today with about 20 credits. So I'm really happy of how things have gone, and I'm really happy that things happen for a reason. And I like to think that now I'm a lot better as a writer than I would have been if I would have been writing professionally in my 20s.
That's awesome. And what inspired you to become a comic book writer?
For me, the main inspiration was when I was growing up, when I was a little kid, my mom used to take me to go to the local video store and I used to rent movies. And my family didn't have a lot of money, so it was one of those things where, she would take us to the park or she would take us to rent movies. And for me, it was just being around all the, movies, watching a bunch of, animated movies. And eventually my dad would let me watch R-rated, horror movies. I started watching Hellraiser. I started watching Nightmare on Elm Street, especially that. And so for me, it just kind of piqued my curiosity about storytelling in movies, especially. So when I discovered comic books, it was one of the ways that I discovered that I love to tell stories visually. And at that time, I wanted to be more as an artist, and I discovered my real love of writing in high school. I had a really good English teacher who really inspired me to kind of just look outside comic books and start looking at, film, look at novels and stuff like that. And eventually, I just fell in love with the craft. I fell in love with how stories are told, especially if you look at, in film, there's a term called like, auteur theory, right? And it's basically that a director or a creator of a film, right, is the auteur. He's the voice of the film, and it's an expression of his artistic, vision, right? And it's something that started with the French New Wave and all stuff like that. And for me, I fell in love with that idea of these creators who have their own voices, who have their own unique style, right? And for me, I always wanted to be like John Carpenter. You know what I mean? For people who don't know, the guy who did Halloween, They Live, just endless amount of classic movies. And for me, they're really unique. They're like when you put on a John Carpenter movie, you know it's a John Carpenter movie. Same thing with like Clive Barker. If you watch one of his movies, you know instantly it's one of his. And of course, nowadays with like Tarantino, right? You have Nolan, you have all these other filmmakers. You can just tell it's their unique vision. And I fell in love with wanting to create that vision for myself and bringing my own vision to life. And writing was the best way of doing it. And it just took a lot of learning and a lot of failure and a lot of, trying to become the best writer I could be.
That's great. Some people definitely think failure is a good thing, though, especially because it helps you learn more how to
Of
become
course.
better and things.
Of course. Yeah. And that's one of those things where, I mean, in life, sometimes you're judged by like, how often, it's easy to look at failure, right? And look at it like, I give up, right? Or that's it. But, especially when it comes to the creative, like being a creative in a business field, right? You're going to encounter that a lot. And you're going to encounter a lot of people telling you no, right? And for me, that was the biggest setback because originally I went to film school and so I went to college, my when I was in my 30s, and I had this vision of, I want to be able to write and tell these stories that I have in my head. And since I couldn't draw, the best way I wanted to do was do it through cinema. And I went to college for that. I made a couple of short films, and I just honestly, I found out quickly that film was not for me, the film business, right? Because you start at the bottom, you're getting people coffee, you're moving cables, you're doing all this stuff, and eventually I got a job with a indie producer, right? And he would just like think of crazy ideas and be like, "Hey, Gio, let's write this movie," right? And he would tell me these teenagers are go to the woods and get killed, right? And I was like, "Okay," so I would write this script and stuff like that, and quickly I started learning that in film, you're gonna encounter a lot of people that aren't creative who think they're creative. And so it was just one of those things where I found that it wasn't for me. I found out that I loved more being in charge of my own creative vision. I loved being able to tell the stories I wanted to tell, as opposed to having somebody over my shoulder constantly dictating, like, you should do this. You don't know. So for me, that was one of those things where film didn't work out for me because I just realized it wasn't for me. So I went back to comic books. I went back to my other passion, which was originally drawing and writing comic books. And at that point in my life, it was I was already in my 30s. I was like 35 already, and I was wondering, like, am I too old for this? Like, am I too old to try to make this happen, right? Because eventually you become, you hit your 30s, you already have a life, you have a job, you have all these other responsibilities. And I was like, you know what? If I don't try now, I'm going to regret this the rest of my life. I'm going to regret not trying. And that's one of the worst things that I think for people is to experience is that grief of not trying. So it was funny. I got laid off from my job of 8 years, and I had no income anymore and I had nothing to do. So I was like, well, you know what? I'm gonna give this comic book thing a shot finally. And so it took, being at my lowest to kind of realize I have to give this a shot. I have to really try and I have to, give it my all because otherwise, I'm gonna regret it. And that's one thing that I want to live with.
I definitely have that same feeling of wanting to create on my own and not wanting to listen to what other people like their rules and things like that. I definitely have that same exact feeling.
Oh yeah, it's just one of those things where you kind of realize, I think, especially for me, I've learned as I've gotten older that, you know, you have a story you want to tell, right? And like what I love about also the people I've worked with, the publishers I've worked with, they've been really like collaborative, right? I don't mind, it's not one of those things where I'm a dictator. It has to be my vision, but I'm always open to suggestions and to conversations, right? If somebody has a better idea, and you know what, if it works, fantastic, right? But it was just one of those things where it's just like I guess with film, you have like these producers who just want to tell you these crazy ideas, like, hey, that story you wrote, like, yeah. So instead of taking place now, it's gonna take place in the 50s. It's like, but I just wrote a script like 95 pages that takes place now. Yeah, just change it to the 50s. It'll be fine. Right. And so just one of those things where it's like, but so you're kind of stuck. So that's one of the things where I really enjoy just that creative process of telling the story how I want to tell it and what I feel is important to the story.
And can you tell me any like memorable experiences you've experienced while doing these comic book ratings?
Honestly, for me, the biggest moment for me for comic books came one time when I was at a convention to meet one of my favorite writers, Grant Morrison. He did X-Men. He's done just countless of books. That he's one of these unusual writers that has a unique voice in comic books, and he's one of my favorite writers. And I met him at a convention, my first time ever meeting him, and I went specifically there to meet him. And it was funny because at this time, I just found myself at my lowest point. I didn't have a job. I was trying to break into comic books, and constantly I kept on getting. I would run into people at conventions. I would try to like network, and people would just constantly shut their door. Just go like, oh, hey, go make a book and come back to us. Oh, hey, you know what? It's like, well, if it was, wow, why didn't I think of that, right? So I constantly got that a lot of people just constantly going, oh yeah, go ahead, do your, come back when you're already published. So after getting a lot of rejection or people just kind of brushing me off of not really taking me seriously, I met him at a convention. I was telling him how much All Star Superman means to me, and if you haven't read it, it's a fantastic book. It's and so I was talking about how much it meant to me, and he was telling me that the thing that he loves about writing is the connection with the audience, with the connection with the reader. And All Star Superman for him was a way of him dealing with his father's death, him trying to come to a closure to that. And he was telling me that basically with comic books, even if you're using Superman, you can tell a deep story. You can tell a story that connects with a reader, and you can make, hopefully, change people's lives in a way. And I never really thought of that. I always just thought that comic books were these cool, action-packed stories. What most people think about, or they're a children's, type of medium and stuff like that. And when he told me that, it just kind of clicked on me. Like, with comic books, it's another way to tell a story. And for me, it made the writing more personal. It made it more deeper than just, oh, I want to tell this cool action story. It's what does the key to any story is character and the conflict of the character and the story and the world. And for me, it just really hit home about, for me, as a writer, you always think of all these cool ideas you want to do, right? I want to do this, I want to do that. But ultimately, I discovered that for me, it has to be a why. Why do I want to tell this story at this time? Why do I want to put all this time and effort into telling this story when I have all these other stories? And for me, that's became my guiding light, became my guiding light where I just wanted to focus on what I want to say with the story and what I want the person reading it to take away from it.
That is an amazing experience. And I'm the same way with networking. I try networking with everyone, and it's not always the easiest thing.
No,
But
it is.
I love it because networking can take you places.
Exactly, and that's one of those things where I kind of realize, I made a lot of good friends. Like I made a lot of people, especially other creators, people that were at the same starting out, or people that just had one book out. And those guys were the most like inspirational and the most like supportive people ever. I still talk to these guys, and they're like the most since day one. Ever since like it was funny. I was at a convention and I ran into this like creator who had his own like creator own book that he was publishing himself, Bill from Yin Yang Productions, and Bill and John, and they were so supportive. They're like, "Hey, you want to write? Go ahead, do it, man. That's what I did. I put this book out myself. We did it together, and you could do it too." And surprisingly, like I said, other creators are the most like receptive to it. It was just editors or like other people in the higher levels that were kind of just dismissive of people. I think of newer creators, and for me, I found that a lot of other creators were just a lot more receptive and a lot more willing to give you advice and be supportive, to be honest with you. That's like the biggest thing.
Yep. I definitely feel that. I'm having a lot of fun meeting with all these I would say indie, but but some people aren't on that indie level, but more indie type comic book writers. I'm having so much fun meeting with all of you guys.
Oh, I'm so glad.
And
It's
I'm
just
learning so much new things too.
that's great. That's one of the things that I'd like, especially about when it comes to talking to other like professionals, is their craft. I've always been one of these people, especially that loves hearing interviews with other writers or other directors or other like creative people, and just hearing their process and what they think and what inspires their work. It's just fascinating once you get into like the behind the scenes type of stuff that I've always found fascinating.
And what age or year did you start writing comic books, and how many have you wrote so far?
Professionally, I've been writing the last 6 years since 2019. So funny enough, so I started. So like I was telling you, it was just one of these things where I found myself just trying to constantly get, network with editors and publishers and stuff like that, and nobody would give me a chance. So eventually I just, I got tired of all these closed doors. So eventually I just say, you know what, I'm going to do my own book. Even if I have to do a mini comic that I write and draw myself, I'm just going to do it. If I have to Xerox it and hand it out to people, that's what I'm going to do. And so I really started working and trying to work on a story to show people. And funny enough, on I became friends with a publisher, Eric Nelson from Maelstrom Comics, and he has a character called Primal. And I added him on social media. I was a big fan of his comic book series, and just randomly I posted on there, "Hey, I'm working on this script for the story that I'm drawing." and he just hit me up, and we started talking. Hey, so you're a writer, and we just started talking about writing and the craft of it. And eventually he was like, hey, we're thinking about bringing back the character. Do you want to pitch a story? Do you want to just show me some examples of what you have? And here's an example. Here's a something I want to let all writers know is always have a pitch, or always have a sample of a story or something you want to do, because eventually there's going to be that day where you get lucky and someone's going to ask you, hey, you're a writer? Oh, let me see that. Oh, you're an artist? Oh, let me see a a-page story that you did. And for me, I was like, sure, I have one, and I didn't. So what I ended up doing is I wrote out the fastest pitch I ever did in my life. And thankfully, like, I'm a big fan of like genre movies. Like, I love 70s, 80s stuff. I love 60s movies. I'm a big cinephile. So for me, it was like you have a jungle story. For me, I'm a big fan of like cheesy Roger Corman type of jungle women in cages movies and jungle movies from the 70s. So I was like, I wrote the story out, and I pitched him the story, and he was like, "Hey, you know what? I like that story." And you're like, "You want to write an issue?" I was like, yes." And so that became my first job ever in comic books. Was somebody taking a chance on me and seeing that I had potential and seeing that I had a passion to tell stories, and it was pretty good. And so he read the story and he loved it, and so he let me write the comeback issue for the series, which is pretty cool because hold on, actually I have it here. So that's my first print. That's my name in print right there for the first time.
That's
So
amazing.
it was one of those things where you dream about it your whole life since I was 9 years old, and then all of a sudden somebody lets you write something, and it was such a fantastic experience because I've never worked with a professional artist before, but Eric was really good about letting me be me, letting me tell the story I want to tell, but also guiding me and letting me, because another advice I give writers anywhere is when you're writing comic books, it's a different medium. It's not a movie, it's not a novel. You are writing specifically for somebody to take what it is that you're writing and reinterpret your writing into a visual form. So it's really important to keep that in mind, pacing and being as visual as possible when it comes to telling setting up a scenario. It's funny, I was telling a friend this. It's kind of like telling somebody a story, before bed, when like a little kid telling them a story and you set up everything for them so they could see it. It's the same thing with comic books. It's you have to tell a story so the artist can see what it is that you want and they can bring that vision to life. And of course you tweak it here and there. But that was my first big gig, and eventually I did a second one, which was my 80s slasher story called Neon the Next Victim, which I am extremely proud of. It was my first story that I wrote, created myself. And it was a story that was a screenplay I wrote 10 years ago, back in my film days, and I always wanted to do something with it. And so when I got an opportunity from my friend Jim for at Totally Rad Comics, he was, do you want to do something? I'm looking for a horror title. I'm like, yes, I got a plot. Of course, you always got to have it ready. So of course I pitched him the story, and he was like, oh, you know what? Let's do an issue. So we did an issue, and that was my first ever story that I owned myself and that I wrote and created myself. And then COVID happened. And it was funny because that year I was lining up, I was going to be my first free comic book day. I was going to be assigning issues and all this stuff planned out. It went out the window. So since then, I've constantly just been writing with a few publishers here and there. I've been really lucky where I've met a lot of good friends, a lot of good collaborators. I've worked with Gary Parkins from Underglow Comics. He has a bunch of really good comic books that I really like. Let me show you something I did for him. And oh, as soon as I can find it. So, one second. Sorry about that. So I did this story for him.
Nice.
So it's my version of a '90s Bad Girl comic, and he was making an anthology called Bad Girl. It was called Bad Girl Comics Anthology, and so it was a bunch of stories, basically like '90s type of comic books. And he's like, hey, is there a story you want to do? And you know, growing up in the early '90s, being a kid and watching like just it was just a different time than it is back then, or back than it was now. It was like crime was high. It was like the drug epidemic. There was, especially, I live in LA, so there was like a lot of gang activity, and I always grew up around that atmosphere. So for me, I wanted to tell a story about a woman whose sister dies because of criminal activity, and she wants revenge. And for me, I really wanted to tell that story because for me it was really important to show people, especially in today's world where people turn on the news and you just see crime is going up, people are innocent, people are getting, hurt or killed, and it just seems that people are helpless. And for me, I wanted to talk about that in my own way and tell people, give people that, I guess, that connection that it's okay to feel like, I guess, you want revenge, right? That it's okay to express, like, you want to do, you want bad people to pay, basically. And for this story, I really wanted the main character to get revenge on the person that took away her loved one. And when I was writing the story, I pitched it like, imagine basically like a 90s crime story with a Nine Inch Nail soundtrack. So that was the whole aesthetic. It was like a 90s goth aesthetic. And for me, it was just fantastic. So working on that project, and then I've been really lucky enough to work with Eric from Maelstrom on a few different projects. I've done about, I think, 5 issues for him already of different stuff. So I was telling you that that pitch that I did for him, right? When he asked me if I was a writer and he asked if I had a pitch ready. So funny enough, he loved that concept, so that pitch that I did for him so much that he released it as his own comic book. So, that story that I did to show him I could write, he ended up loving it so much that he published it as a two issue miniseries. So it was just one of those things where you never know what can happen, you know, with stories or what you have, in your on your computer. And it just really made me happy, the fact that he liked that first pitch, that first script I ever wrote professionally, so much that he produced this comic book for it. And so far, I think I have, last time I counted, about 20 credits. And also, I've been really lucky where I've actually started drawing professionally as well, which is pretty cool. I wish I actually had some examples of my covers, but I've done, the first thing I ever did was a trading card. And let me see if I can find it. Sorry about that. Well, it's somewhere here. But that was my first professional artwork that I had published, was on a trading card for Cara Nicole and Alfred Trujillo for their Fire Bitch comic book. And it was there was a he was really gracious enough to, I would ask him tips on drawing because I've always wanted to draw, and I still do. I kind of draw for fun, and he was very gracious enough to give me tips. And then he was like, "Hey, you're getting really good at drawing," because I was during COVID, and at that time I didn't have much doing on, going on, so I just started drawing. And he was lucky enough to let me draw, and he gave me really good tips. And eventually, I just started drawing more professionally from then on. So I kind of just do for fun now. Like, I think I have like a real. This is something I did for a friend of mine. So I drew that, a sketch cover. So I kind of did
That's
that
great.
just for fun, and it's just one of those things where, like I said again, it always goes. Oh, this is the first thing I ever had done professionally. So
Nice.
that's my first published art, which is really cool because, like I said, me being a lifelong wanting to draw since I was about like a little kid was really good. So I've been really lucky where I've worked with really great collaborators and done a lot of great stories. So I'm really happy, and I look forward to more.
I'm one of those people who has a lot of ideas, like story ideas. But see, my problem also lies with um pacing. And like somebody said in another interview as well, pacing matters a lot.
Hmm.
So for people who are like me who has ideas but suck at pacing, what advice do you give on how to pace better?
So here's something that I think is very useful. It's something I took for film. So with my writing, my writing is a mixture of comic book writing and screenplay writing. For me, I find that works for me a lot better, right? And so when I first was learning how to write comic books, right, there's no official book. There's no industry like real, like, no, but there's no real set standard, right? People kind of take what they want, or they kind of, they kind of take, there's a semi format, but people kind of just exaggerate and they kind of just go whatever they feel, right? And for me, that was actually my biggest problem because comic books is a visual medium, right? And as a writer, for me, it was, learning that was the biggest thing, the biggest hurdle. And that was my biggest fear, like for the first, when I first started taking this seriously, was I was scared of pacing because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how many pages I needed for a scene. How do I break this up? How do I break this down? So the biggest advice I found is actually from, so when I write, right, I write an outline. I write an outline and I have the whole story broken down, right? And then I break down that issue into, I mean, I break down that outline, the whole from beginning to end, into issues, right? Okay, I want this to happen, issue one. I want the cliffhanger to be this. And then issue two will start from here. I broke it down from then, right? So a biggest thing I did for pacing, which especially early on, I don't do this anymore because now I kind of feel I have a feel for it, is you do bullet points, right? And so do a bullet point, right? 24, let's say it's 22 pages, right? Do a bullet point, right? 20 for each one of those pages, and try to break down the scene into beats, right? So scene A, character walks in and they discover a dead body, right? So that's the beat, right? So I started breaking it down like that to kind of get the beats going. And for me, that was the biggest help, I guess, for me was in order for the pacing was to keep it just at that level, just keep the beats going. And so that way the story stays engaging and the story stay keeps the reader interested. Because one of the things I've noticed is, especially nowadays, I think with comic books being really accessible to a lot more people, is that there's a lot of people that I feel think that they could take a screenplay, right, or they can take a loose idea and turn that into a comic book, but it reads it, but there's no pacing to it. It all it is just like a scene, or it drags on too long and it doesn't engage the reader. And so for me, that's the biggest advice I can offer is try to do bullet points for beats of every page and hit those marks when you're writing. So that way you just keep going, hitting him like this, and it keeps the reader engaged. And like I said, now I stopped doing that because I kind of have a feel now on how to do that naturally. But early on, trust me, that was my biggest fear was not like the pacing. And that's one thing you really have to learn is in comic books, it's a visual medium. It's all about the pacing. It's all about keeping the energy and making the reader enjoy reading it. As much as I love Alan Moore, sometimes I have to sit there and it takes a while to read them. You know what I mean?
Yes. So, what do you think makes a successful comic book series?
For me, what I think it makes a successful comic book series is, first of all, passion from the creator. You should never do something just because it makes money or just because it sounds cool, right? Anybody can come up with an idea like that and just put it out. But what makes for me personally successful to me is doing something that is meaningful to me and is meaningful hopefully to the reader, and also successful because we produce a quality product, right? At the end of the day, comic books is a product. You have to put out a product that's good, that's well written, well drawn, well colored, well lettered, and well everything, right? And so for me, the biggest takeaway for me personally as a writer is what can I bring to the story? So Neon is my story about is a 1980s slasher story, right? But the roots of it came because I had a friend that died a few years ago and I never got to say goodbye. I never got closure, right? So I was left with that guilt of, oh man, maybe if I would have tried to reach out to them before, or maybe if I would have done this or that. And I just found myself kind of just always wondering, what could I have done? And so in this story, we have a character named Annalisa whose best friend is murdered. And years before, they had a falling out and they never made up. So she has to figure out why her best friend was murdered and what does it have to do with a serial killer that's terrorizing Los Angeles in 1983. And so for me, the main thing was that idea of loss, of grief, of the idea of not having closure, and what someone is willing to do to get that, to make that feeling go away, that guilt. And that's where the story was stemmed from. So for me personally, that was my biggest example of success, was trying to express that feeling that I have inside and tell that story through a mainstream, story. And like I was saying, also pay attention to detail, story, and make sure that you try to make it as well written as possible, because you only have one chance to get a reader, right? And sometimes if somebody randomly picks up a book and they open and the first thing they read is just a talking scene of people eating and having a conversation about nothing, it's going to turn people off, right? Just to be honest. And so you really have to try to engage the reader and give them something right off the bat that they connect with and they can enjoy with, and hopefully they'll follow the series throughout it. So, of course, and another important thing is also, of course, investing in quality artists. Comic books is notorious, especially right now. If you go on Kickstarter, you'll see a lot of different projects, and sometimes you see people that honestly aren't ready for Showtime. It's because, as much as passion as you have for something, you have to know to invest time, money, and passion into a project and really bring it to life the best way you can. And sometimes you have to invest money. Sometimes you have to either work with an artist, or if you're lucky enough to find an artist that wants to collaborate with you on a 50-50 split, then that's great, but that's more the exception than the rule. A lot of times, especially if you're a writer, you're gonna have to pay to hire an artist to draw it for you, and then a letterer, and then or a colorist and stuff like that. So it takes time. It takes a lot. So you have to make sure the story that you want to tell, it's worth all those hours of overtime, all those hours that you're not spending at home, and all that headache that you're doing is getting, all this, dealing with artists and editors and stuff like that. So make sure that it's something that you believe in, something you're passionate about, and something that's gonna be worth investing all that time into it.
It's awesome. And now on the topic of artists, this is a bit more of a controversial topic, but I have been seeing it a lot today. How do you feel about people using AI in comic books?
So it's very touchy, right? Because I think that I'm an artist, right? I draw, and I've always been a type of guy where I draw paper, right? Even to this day, like for example, where is it? So this is something I drew, right, a while ago. So right, so I drew this. So I still draw on pen and paper, right? I still draw pencil. And for me, I've always had that thing where I love physical media, right? I'm one of these guys that I collect Blu-rays, I collect DVDs, I collect the special edition Blu-ray, I collect the 4K, I collect this and that. And I've always been a physical person. I can't do digital, right? So I've had this topic with a lot of friends, especially creator friends, about AI and art. And so me personally, what I think is that AI can be a tool, right? It can be a tool for somebody, right, who wants to, let's just say, for instance, right, let's just say I can't draw for anything, right? And I'm trying to describe to an artist, like, hey, I want the character to look like this. I can see how somebody could go on there, generate, oh, this is how I want the character to look, and type it up and show the artist. Okay, you're using it as a tool, right? As a, to visualize to an artist what it is that you want. I could see that, right? So for me, the biggest problem I have is that people not admitting what is they're doing, right? If you're an artist and you work primarily with AI, then you should state that, right? So that way people know. Because the thing about it, uh, drawing is hard work. Drawing takes a lot of hours, especially I know, because like I said, when I was trying to write and draw my own comic book years ago, working, it took me like 8 hours to do, like, on a, to do a one page, and it even wasn't even that good. Right? And so a lot of hard work comes into it. So I can see how typical, artists nowadays look at it, and they look at it as cheating, and I can see why. Because AI art, all it does is basically searches the internet for images and mix them all together. It gives you what it is that you typed up. So I can see why people are really against it. And for me personally, I mean, like, as an artist, I can see why, right? I would never use it. And it's funny because I've had friends show me, like, send me an AI picture, right? And to show me how it doesn't work. So I had one guy that, showed me when he was trying to do a Batman or something like that, and it came out just all wrong. So I can see that. But to be honest with you, when it comes to art, like I said, if someone's saying, so there's a traditional artist, I can understand why they're upset. I truly can. And but I do think it's unfair though for someone to do something in AI and then call themselves, an artist, right? If someone says, "Hey, art done, AI art done by this person," okay, then we know what it is, right? You're not lying about it. You're being honest. If people want to buy it, then hey, you're providing a product. People want to buy it. Great, you're being honest, right? Another thing I have a problem with ChatGPT, which is for me as a writer, is one of those things where I can't support, right? Because it's writing is a serious craft, especially for me. And I know a lot of other writers who take their writing really seriously and they put a lot of time, effort, and energy into telling a story. And you know, for someone to just go on there and just chat GPT a script and just put it out there with no care in the world, for me, that's the biggest problem. But that's a personal thing. I wouldn't support it, but if someone else is doing it, then I can't tell that person what to do. But like I said, I can understand the hate, right? But like I said, for me personally, if someone's admitting it to from the start, hey, look, I wrote this with ChatGPT, that's you. I can't tell you anything.
Thanks for your thoughts on it. And how do you stay organized and manage deadlines when you're doing your comic books?
So this was another big thing for me when I became professional because before then I would just constantly I had projects and I would work on them here and there throughout the day or throughout the weeks, throughout the months. But it's something my wife constantly tells me, you need a deadline. You need to set a deadline, otherwise you're gonna lollygag. And that was one of the biggest thing where when you're writing professionally, remember now your creativity is a job, right? And sometimes I know sometimes artists, creatives don't like looking at their creativity as a job, but it is. And so when you have to write something, you need to keep in mind deadlines and you need to keep yourself organized because trust me, there are some times when I'm writing and I need to go back to my notes. And so that's why for me, being organized is the biggest helper you can have, especially if you're going to need a script. I had one project where the art was already drawn and they had no script. So it was like literally like, oh, here, script this, right? And so I just basically got a bunch of notes down of what the story was, what I saw, and what I could do with it, and I had to get out a script in a few days, right? And so it's not necessarily my favorite thing to do, but in film, I come from a film background. You kind of learn how to do things on the fly, right? If take for instance, right? In film, if a camera doesn't come in, okay, what can we do? Get a GoPro and do this and do this, and so you have to find a way to get the job done. But you can't say, oh well, right? And so for my writing, I take the same thing. I organize myself very well. I have folders for every film, every writing project I'm doing. I have a script. I have the initial rough draft, the first draft, the second draft, the third draft. I have them dated, and then I have another folder for what I call deleted scenes. So sometimes I'll have something that doesn't fit or something I thought fit but didn't. So I'll take it out of there and I'll put it inside there. And another thing I do is also I keep a folder with my general. Basically, I have outlined the whole story and beats I want to hit, and then in there I have a thesis for the story, right? What I hope to accomplish, what I want to do with it, what it means to me. So at the end of the day, I always go back and look at that. Now, that's all great. I'm organized like that. I write a full detailed, outline. But sometimes when you're writing a script, it all goes out the window. Sometimes you'll just start writing halfway through it. You think, hey, what if that character that I killed off in issue two comes back? Right? You're like, oh, that's a great idea. So then you just trail away from the plot and then you just do something else and then you go back to it. And so sometimes you have to let that creative process really just take over. And I know for writers, there's always outliners and there's the people that go by their pants, right? The pantsers, that's what we call them, right? So people that would just go on the fly and just think of something. So for me, I try to be as organized as possible, but I leave myself open to inspiration. I leave myself up open to if I get a better idea, I go down that route. And sometimes, like I said, sometimes a plot will change halfway.
That's great. And can you describe your collaboration process with artists, editors, and other people?
So the biggest one I've had to do is Okay, so I've done work for hire, and I've done like more of my own creator own stuff. Now, of course, everybody loves their own creator stuff because you're their own boss, right? So you can do what you want. But working in a field where your creativity is your job, sometimes you have to learn how to be not as precious when it comes to your work, and so you have to really make sure that when you're working with collaborators that you have a good relationship with them. But what I normally base this on is how I get along with the creator on a personal level. For me, it's all about that. If I get along with this person, me and them have the same outlook on comic books, on writing, on drawing, and making a quality product, then I know they're coming at this from a good place. So right, so sometimes we might have disagreements about a character's motivation, a character's background, or a plot twist, but we both come at it from we both care about the story. So when it comes to publishers, it's one of those things where when it's work for hire, the publisher is basically they have the final say, right? Now I can push for like what I want to do or something I feel strongly, but I've been really lucky with all the publishers that I've worked with that they'll listen to me and they'll let me present my case on why I think this is the correct way to do stuff. And a lot of times, you know what, they'll follow me down that trail. And so it's really important not to be combative or take things too precious, because I know as creative people, sometimes we tend to look our own art, not objectively, and so sometimes we just think that we just wrote the greatest thing ever and it cannot be altered. But you have to also learn when it's work for hire, you're doing this for somebody else and they have a say in it, right? Now, like I said, so you have to really learn not to take criticism. You have to take criticism well. You have to learn not to take things personally and to really be a collaborator as opposed to being the sole visionary behind a story, because that's how you're gonna end up not having jobs in the future, right? If you're constantly just want to argue and have stuff your way. So with artists, for me, it's one of the biggest like things I had to learn is that not every artist needs the same type of script, right? You have some artists I've worked with where they need a detailed breakdown, like a huge paragraph, like I'm writing a novel, right? Of what's going on, where things are. I've worked with artists sometimes that they want sketches or a diagram of how a location would look like or a character, right? But then I've worked with other artists who all they need is a general idea story. Main character walks in, the house is messy, and he smokes a cigarette, and then they'll take it from there, right? So you have that really good example of, you really have to learn what type of artist you're working with and get to know them, because sometimes, to be honest, some artists get offended if you try to dictate you know what their job is, right? I remember this famous story that Grant Morrison said, where he wrote a script for Greg Capullo, and he basically broke down the script down to the smallest detail and even the sketches. And I think Greg said that he felt offended by that because he had a writer telling him how to do his job. So it's one of those things where you really have to know your collaborator and know what is that they want from you. So what I always like doing is talking to the artist. Hey, how do you want me to write this script? Do you want me to go full detail? Do you kind of want a loose outline? Do you just want me to kind of, what is it? What do you work more comfortably with? And a lot of these artists will tell you from the start, like, oh, you know what? I like a detailed outline. Oh, you know what? Just kind of give me a general idea and I'll kind of go with it and we'll fix it in editing, right? And so that's the biggest thing for me is learning to collaborate with artists. And then another thing, for the most part, writers don't have much to do with when it comes to colorists or anything like that. But if you're doing your own book, of course, you have to oversee everything. And lettering is another big thing I think a lot of writers don't think about, is that you really have to make sure to do a pass on the script during the lettering phase, because sometimes the art will change. Sometimes an artist will add panels, take away panels, or change stuff around. Sometimes it's not intentionally, but it happens. So always give that script a final pass and make sure it matches the art, because sometimes you might have written something and it won't flow as easy with the art. So just make sure to always look at it and read it as a first time reader, so that way it flows very well.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Okay. So, how do you keep up with trends and challenges in the comic book world?
Honestly, I've never. This is so when I first got into comic books, right? It was during the speculator boom, right? So in the 90s, comic books just hit an all-time high where we just had people thought they were going to retire off of, you know, whatever comic book came out. So you had people buying 100 copies thinking they're going to retire in 5 years, and it exploded. The whole industry just collapsed because the speculator boom could not hold it, right? So now, comic books were almost wiped out in the 90s because of this. You had a lot of publishers go out of business. Funny enough, a lot of like the publisher I work with, a lot of them were from the 90s. So a lot of them tell me stories about how it was like in the 90s, going to conventions, being rock stars, and then all of a sudden everything collapsed. All of a sudden, nobody was buying books anymore, nobody was putting out books. So, you know, w- as in life, things go, up and down, right? And right now, I feel, especially in the last 5 years, there's been a real like there's been a turbulent time in comic books, right? For me personally, I don't like being involved like in the politics of comic books. I don't really use Twitter either because I think it's a cesspool. But of people just mad and complaining all day, and I don't want that negativity in my life. But it's really important to also look at what's going on in the industry itself, right? And I think right now is the best time for independent creators to put their own books out there. There's never been a time right now where you can buy an iPad and draw, right? You can get together with a friend and put out a book yourself. You don't need a publisher. You can easily just go to Kickstarter or Indiegogo or whatever they have, or you can even put it through your website. So there's no gatekeepers anymore, I guess you could say, right? So now it's a lot more easy for people to put product out there. So you don't need to go through Image anymore or Dark Horse anymore, right? You can easily do it yourself. You can put it out through to a publisher if you want. So it's a really great way to honestly do stuff. And right now I think comic books are in a flux right now because, to be honest with you, I think there's oversaturation of comic books right now, especially of the big two. They're putting out too many events. I mean, every few weeks there's a different event, and each one is 60 issues or whatever it is. And I think comic book buyers now are a lot more thoughtful about what it is they want to buy and support. And I've also noticed that now a lot of I go to the same comic book shop every week, right? And I talk to the owners, and I talk to, like, I see other people what they're picking up, and I notice one of the biggest things is people are following a lot more writers and a lot more artists. People are buying books because Ed Brubaker wrote this, right? Or they're buying this because this writer's doing it, right? And so I've noticed nowadays that if you can really build yourself a brand, right? Or have yourself really out there where people know that you're putting out quality work, people will follow you wherever you go. So I think it's funny, right? There's a in film, right? So I'm sure if you're familiar with in Italian films, right? I'm a big fan of Italian movies, right? So whenever a genre will become popular in America, in Italy, they would follow the trend and they would make their own knockoffs of it, right? So when Jaws came out, they would make their own Jaws. When the Western came out, they would do their spaghetti Westerns, right? When Conan came out, they did their own sword and sorcery thing. So it was always a thing of following that trend, right? Now, the important thing is, I think, is instead of trying to follow a trend, try to create, I guess, your own, I guess you could say, right? Don't think about what other people are doing as opposed to think about, you, what is that you want to tell, right? What is the things that you love and that you want to express, and brand yourself as that. Because I think when people chase trends, you end up just chasing, like, going like this. And then, trust me, right now, it might be, samurai comic books are popular. By the time you get yours out, it's already over, right? So I think it's really important to just kind of do do whatever you're passionate about, and people will find you.
That's some great tips right there. One of my favorite ways to get things out there and branded is the use of social media. So, do you think you can discuss the role of social media and digital platforms in promoting your own work?
So here's the thing, right? So creative people are known for not being social, right? And I am one of those proud people that I am not that social when it comes to social media. Like, I am one of those people that I like, just leave me alone and let me work on my stuff, and can somebody else do it, right? But in today's world, you have to do that. You have to build a brand for yourself. You have to get yourself out there, and you have to let people know you exist, because otherwise you're going to get lost in the noise, right? And that's one of the things, as a creator, I think that you really have to step up, even though a lot of us don't like it. You have to put yourself out there and really share your own work, promote yourself, and really tell people why they should check you out, because honestly, they won't, especially today's world where they have so many things going on, where you have TikTok, you have Instagram, you have this, you have that, and then whatever's going to come out next year, it's going to be hard for people to follow that. So it's really important, I think, for people to really become, the way I look at it is, I don't try. I'm too old to be one of these like influencer type of people where they're right. I can't do that. I'm too old, and I don't think I'm gonna die of cringe if I try doing it, right? But I can see why younger people do it, right? Like people, like people who are 20 years old, 20, 19. I can see how they can turn their, they can go for that, and they can be successful in promoting themselves, because they're a generation that was raised with social media being a prime factor of people engaging with each other, right? So I can see that. So I think people, especially older people, it's hard for us to learn the importance of social media, because a lot of us don't really want to do it. I know I'm guilty of that. I really don't like doing that. But like I said, it's one of those things where I have to brand myself. I have to make sure I'm putting stuff out there. Whenever I have a book coming out, I make sure I promote it. I share it, and wherever I can, I tell people about it, and put myself out there. Sometimes you can't be scared to put yourself out there, because if you don't do it, no one else will. And that's one of the things of life in comic books, especially in when you're a creative person, you have to do that, because otherwise, why is somebody gonna buy your book when they can easily go to Barnes and Noble and get something, or go somewhere else, right? So you have to get people interested in finding your work and what. So for me, it's always about a fan base, right? You have to, if someone likes slasher movies, right, I'm gonna talk about my book, right? Because it's that's the audience for it, right? If I have a story about zombies, then of course I'm going to try to get people that love zombie movies and stuff like that. So you really have to know your base, and you have to know where to promote it to, because you don't want to try to promote a zombie story, right, in a area where they read Twilight, right, for example, right. And so you really want to make sure you know the audience that you have, and go for that audience. You never want to do something for a phantom audience. That's the thing I've noticed as well. Like, you don't want to do something hoping you'll get this audience. Do it for the audience that you have, that you have, the audience that will like this product. And if you get that other people, great. But go for that audience, because if you try to go for this audience with this book, it's not going to work.
Do you have any upcoming projects or collaborations you're excited about that we can discuss?
Yes, actually. So right now I'm working with Maelstrom Comics right now on the follow-up to the latest Primal series. So I've been really lucky where I've been writing the series for the last 3, 4 issues, and I started this big story arc. So one of the things that I think, as a writer, you should always challenge yourself, right? And so for me, I've always loved big, epic comic book stories, right? Something that Jeff Johns would write, something that Mark Miller would write. And so for me, I've never written a story like that. So I really wanted to do this with the story. So in the last few issues, especially, so that's the latest issue right here, issue 8. There you go. Right, that's issue 8, right? So we've been building to a big climax of this story I call Primal and Chains. And it's if you love big epic action type of stories, this is where the story is going towards, right? And so I'm really excited to tell this story and to really see it come to an end, because for me, like I was telling you, it's all about character, right? You might have a big epic action scene, you might have a star fleet, you might have bad guys, good guys fighting, duking it out. But for me, it's character. And then in this story, it's about a character who makes a decision with good intentions, and it ends up costing her everything. And so for me, it was really important in the story to tell that. So I'm really excited for people to read that issue, and for it to end pretty soon. I'm coming towards the end of this arc, and I'm super excited that I'm working with Eric on The next issue, I'm super excited. We have a really good artist on issue 8, Christian Zahner. I'm not, if he was one of those '90s, like those guys that drew in the '90s. I was a big fan of. Like I remember reading his issues on Rising Stars and stuff like that, and to now be working with him, it's so full circle. Same thing with Eric. Like Eric was drawing comic books in the '90s, and to be working with him on books is so it's really out of this world. And I've been lucky enough to work with a couple of like these '90s guys that have just been so awesome. Ricky Calero from High Impact Comics back in the '90s. I remember reading those, and so now, like I worked with them on 2 projects, and so I was really happy about that. So for right now, I have a couple of projects lined up. I can't really talk about too much. I have some more stuff coming out this year, and I'm excited for people to check it out. This hopefully they're going to be really interesting. One thing I like doing is giving people something different, giving some people something unique that only I can tell. Now, when you're this is one of the biggest thing I've learned also is that you know there's lots of stories, right? So I think there's an age old saying that goes, "Every story's been told," right? And for me, that's true, right? There's only so many ways you can tell a story, right? Man has woman, loses woman, gains her back, right? Or, this and that and that. There's always like the hero's journey and stuff like that. But for me, what's important is you as a creator, how can you tell that story differently? How can you make it unique to yourself, right? Now, look at example, like there's lots of creators like that, right? That could take a story and just make it unique to only themselves, right? John Carpenter did this with Halloween, right? He did this with The Thing, stuff like that. So the way I look at it is, for me, I'm always I'm one of these weird people, right? Where a lot of the stuff I make is inspired by the stuff I grew up loving, right? And for me, I always look at it as, how can I tell a story like that, but in my own way? And so, Neon was a slasher movie that I wanted to tell, but I wanted to be really unique. So so I retold the story in the only way I could, and so that's what I 100% love doing. And for me, I just love being able to tell people, show people something different. I can, giving them something that they expect and then going the other way and giving them more. So that's really important. And just for that, I'm writing a novel right now, which I'm pretty excited about. I've always wanted to write the great American novel. So I'm writing a novel right now. So I'm pretty excited about that. It's another thing where I'm transitioning to another medium, right? So I went from screenwriting to writing comic books, and then having to learn how to write prose, which is totally different, right? Because on one hand, I have a lot more world building, but and then I have a lot more. I could tell my story and not be worried about like how many pages I have. But it's also really scary because sometimes, like, you don't want to invest a year into a book that's 300 pages and no one reads it. So I'm kind of scared about that.
Yep. And what do you think are some common misconceptions about the comic book industry?
There's quite a few, actually. The biggest thing that I've found is that people seem to have this idea that their first Kickstarters, they're gonna be the next like big rock star. That's the biggest thing I've found. That people just think that your story itself is gonna be the most epic thing ever, and you're gonna make $1 million and stuff like that. No. All right. The thing I've seen that a lot of times. I've seen people who just have like these really big high hopes, and then they just come crashing down. Like I know for the first Kickstarter that I was involved in, we barely made our funding, right? And you know, it's just one of those things where you have to learn the reality of the business, right? You have to learn that you have to promote, you have to really sell yourself, you have to sell the project. And people just have this idea that automatically, you're going to put it out there and you're going to get all these people going to come wanting to buy it. That's not going to happen. You're going to have to hustle, you're going to have to sell it, you're going to have to promote it. That's why a lot of respect to those guys out there who go to conventions every weekend selling their books. I give them all respect for that because that's a lot of work, and you have to do it because if you don't do it, no one else will. And that's a big misconception I've seen about comic book. Another thing I've seen actually is um, another misconception I have is that people just think that writing is easy. Like you just, oh, I'm just gonna write this out and that's it, right? Or I'm gonna put out a comic book and I'm just gonna the writing. I don't really care about it. I'm just gonna put it out. It's all about the art. It's a marriage of both. You really have to make sure that that the art matches the writing. And for me, that's one of my biggest pet peeve is when you have the most amazing art ever, but the script sucks, right? Or you have the most great, writing ever, but the art is not that great. So it's really important to take your time and and make sure that the quality is there and it's worth people supporting, right? Because no one is entitled to their money, right? You're not. No one's entitled to other people's money, right? People have to want to buy it, especially right now in today's world where people are spending a lot more money on food and going out and if you try going to Disneyland, it's like so expensive now, right? And it's one of those things where it's just like it's really shocking. Like I went to Japan earlier in the last year and we went to Tokyo Disney, right? And it was so much cheaper. I was like, man, right? And so it was great not spending a ton of money, and I just have to go halfway across the world for it, right? And so for me, that's one of the biggest thing where you have to make sure that you get people, make it worth for them to buy and for them to support and for them to come back. That's another thing. Make sure you have your make sure you have everything plot organized because I think one thing I've also realized in comic books, especially if you're crowdfunding, there's a lot of people that don't have the book done or it takes them too long to get done or stuff like that. You know, there's always stuff that happens. Life happens, people get sick, people get hurt, right? As long as you let your backers know, hey, you know what? There's a delay in this and just update people. People are actually pretty nice. People will actually follow you and people are pretty understanding. But definitely try always to keep yourself organized, be honest with your audience, and always respect your audience. That's another thing. People just seem to think, oh, I'm going to put this out and that's it. No, you have to make sure to respect your audience and treat them like they're intelligent and treat them like they're a valuable member of the community because they are. Without people backing or reading our books, where would we be, right? And you need the readers, right? But also, I'm from the school of thought that you should always respect your readers and the readers should respect you back as a creator, right? And I think a lot, especially in today's world where things get so toxic because you have fandoms that think that, oh, I'm entitled to this, and then you have creators that think, well, you know what, you're dumb, you don't know anything. The thing is, it's you have to it has to be mutually respected, and you have to respect your audience, and just like that, they should respect you back and respect you as a creator. You should do everything you can to make them feel like you're giving them everything that you got, and that way they'll want to keep supporting you. And you know what? That keeps you happy and it makes you feel fulfilled.
That's great. And now we just have two more questions before we're done. The next question is, can you share any tips for aspiring comic book writers?
So my biggest tip is what I tell everybody is first of all, you're gonna get ready for a lot of setbacks, get ready for a lot of no's. You're going to have people that are going to want to say no as opposed to saying yes. And sadly, that's a part of the industry. There's a lot of people, I think, especially, I don't know, the way I was raised was always, you always want to help other people out, right? If it was difficult for you to, do something, you want to make it easier for the next guy, right? So you're going to try to give them advice, let them know how to do it, and definitely try to be there for them as a example of what happens if you do good work, right? But sadly, I think today's world, our people aren't really like that anymore. People want you to do the hard work yourself, and I've noticed for especially for me, when I was first trying to break in, I could not get anyone to really give me advice, and really, most people just treated me like, oh, well, brushed me off or treated me like I was just a fan or like I was basically nothing. And for me, it took a lot of passion to know that I wanted to do this seriously. I wanted to take this seriously, and I had something to say. So I really wanted to push myself and let not let no's keep me from pursuing my passion, right? But the important thing is that you also have to make sure that you have the skill, the professionalism, and the drive to tell a good story. And I think a lot of people could just get focused on, I have to, I want to be an artist, but do you put in the time, right? I want to be a writer. Do you put in the time? Do you pay attention to the craft? Do you, are you focused on telling a character, a development of a character from point A to point B? Are you interested in, not just creating cardboard cutouts of people or three-dimensional people, but are you interested in doing more with the craft, right? As opposed to just being a guy who just wrote out a story and doesn't care about any of the other technical aspects, right? So it's really important, I think, to just really, if you're going to immerse yourself in telling, getting into comic books or writing professionally, right? Really research. That's what I see. I'm in a lot of Facebook groups for writers and creators, and every other day I always see the same thing. I want to write a comic book. How do I do it? Or hey, somebody write the script for me. And it's like it doesn't work that way. I wish it was a button I could push and hey, look, here's a comic book that's already finished, right? You have to put in the time and learn. Learn from research. I remember when I was first learning how to write comic books, I could not find like a single source, right, to tell me this is what a comic book should be. Instead, what I did is I looked at all the writers that I liked and I found their scripts online for free. Right? I looked up Ed Brubaker, I looked up Brian Michael Bendis, I looked up Matt Fraction, I looked up a bunch of writers that I really liked, and I looked at their scripts and I was like, you know what? I'm starting to see a pattern here, what they're doing. And so what I did is I took from that, I took notes of what I liked, what they were doing, and I made it my own. Right. So really research it, really make sure that for me, make sure that your story has a beginning, middle, and end. Make sure that your characters are going through something and come out different people, right? One of my biggest pet peeves is just kind of when you have a character who's one way and then at the end doesn't change or doesn't learn a lesson, right? Because at the end, every character should be able to go through an arc, just like in life, right? So definitely make sure we do that. And also, there's going to be lots of hours, right? You're going to put a lot of time into writing these scripts. You're going to put a lot of long nights. You're going to put in a lot of effort. And trust me, there's some days where what I'm trying to write, and then my wife wants to watch a movie or something, and I'm like, okay, hold on, let me finish what I'm writing, right? So you're gonna have to make a lot of sacrifices in order to to learn and to make sure that your career keeps going forward. And it's really important to just stay focused and not give up. That's the biggest thing. Don't give up and just keep going forward. As long as you're passionate, as long as you take the craft seriously, then you'll be fine.
That's some great tips. And now our last question is, where do we find your comic books?
So right now you can get them through the publishers mainly. I have through Maelstrom Comics, Totally Rad Comics, Underglow Comics. You can get, actually, it's pretty cool. You can get Gary has a nice, awesome hardcover which features my short story, Porcelain. You can get my comic book series, Dion. I covered it because this is the only version the cover I had. So, but that's the character, and you can definitely just always feel free to message me on Instagram or Facebook. I'm on there. If you want to ever try to find a copy, I could definitely try to hook you up with the publisher and try to get you a copy. And definitely, always feel free to just, reach out. I'm always, never mind interacting with people, especially if you want, if you ever feel like, no, if you ever want like somebody who advice or something like that, always feel free to reach out to me. I was one of those things where I always like to play it forward. I'm one of these people that believes that just because, there was a lot of people that never wanted to give me the time of day, that I shouldn't do the same. I don't want to be the same type of person. I want to be there as a person that people can reach out to in case they have any questions or if they want any type of advice. You know, always feel free to reach out to me because honestly, I think I don't want people to kind of have to go through what I went through and having to stress out and trying to learn something without any help. And I think it's really important that as humans, we're here for each other. And without the next generation, where would the medium go, right? So definitely feel free to hit me up. It's my full name, Giovanni Borunda, on Facebook, and then I have Instagram, it's Gio underscore B as in boy 83.
Great. Okay, now we are done. I'm very happy I got to meet with you today. This was an amazing interview.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's really great questions, by the way. I was letting my wife read over the questions. She was like, "Wow, those are really good." I'm like, "I know, right?" They're really a smart. Like I really appreciate like really good like thought out questions about the craft and about writing and stuff like that. So it was really great. It was really nice talking to you.
It's nice talking to you as well. And now, bye to all people that are watching live. And